NA versus Goosey Bad, I believe, was the last time we saw this one play out, and those explosives are, those affixes are explosive raging, and it is Complexity Limit versus Ethical. The winner of this series goes on to the grand finals to face Method NA, and here they are on Siege of Boralus.
All right, so we see a mirror comp actually for both of the teams running double Hunter plus Rogue. We see both of them also running Alliance, so they'll have this Alliance starting point and also have the Alliance mobs to deal with in this dungeon.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something that we've talked about when it comes to Siege of Boralus, and this is something we've been talking about for a year and a half at this point. The general strat to this dungeon is to deal with the spotters, but already trouble for Complexity Limit here. As some fired up goes down during this trash skip, they don't have to use a battle risk since they all dropped combat, but already on top on the board, they've had to halt their trash skip 5 seconds because of the death timer, and they're just late into getting into this last boss room. Fortunately for them, the strat hadn't been popped yet, so it could have been a lot worse than it actually ended up being. But yeah, just small mistakes right off the bat there for them.
Yeah, Ethical on their side did do a huge trash pull. Did not ended up pulling the boss on top though, which is, I believe, what we have seen from Goosey Bad. They're dealing with the trash itself, also used that Bloodlust, as I said. Complexity Limit, on the other hand, having Twisted going down on their trash pull. They do have a battle rest available, but it needs to be an engineering rest as they don't have any battle rest class. So they'll have to use the engineering rest anyway, because even if they finish off this trash without him, they don't have a class that can out of combat rest, so need to commit that battle rest.
Yeah, they absolutely have to use it there, and I wonder what he actually ended up going down to. Could it have possibly been a frontal from the Vanguard there, but also Max now going down to the trash as well, and I mean, is this going to be a full team wipe from them? I don't think there's any way they can kite this out.
I mean, it's possible, but even if they can't rest, so the other people have to release no matter what is happening here. So either way, this is going to be a huge disaster for Complexity Limit. Huge time loss coming in on the very first pull already. Very unfortunate. Everyone needs to release now. Because they did a skip at the very start, they're going to have to either wait for the Shadow Melts to come back up before they do the skip again, or they need to use Invis Potions to be able to do the same skip again. Ethical, on the other hand, they are fighting the first boss here, already are on 57%.
Yeah, I mean, they're just go ahead and cleaning right through this boss, already down below 25% on Chopper Red Hook there.
Never mind,
absolutely murdering the boss. Yeah, we're Horde players. We don't actually know what this boss's name is for Alliance guilds, so it's, yeah, I would have messed it up too, I think, giving it a glance like that. But yeah, of course, this is actually a differing dungeon. The boss names are different in this first section of the dungeon based off of whether or not you're Alliance or Horde, on top of actually all of the other trash mobs being different as well. Also interesting to note is that for Alliance, these ads that spawn during the initial encounter spawn a lot faster for Alliance, and on top of that, they continue spawning even if you've CC'd and haven't killed the first set of trash mobs, which is completely different for Horde. For Horde, if you otherwise CC or don't deal with the first couple of trash mobs, they just won't respawn. So there are different advantages to going a Horde and Alliance in this dungeon as well, and we're kind of just seeing, these teams are choosing Alliance just because it allows you to complete the first section of the dungeon faster.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked to the teams and they said that Alliance is more difficult overall, but because it's all about that dungeon speed, and they have the execution, and they trust themselves to be able to do the more difficult route to get a little bit of extra time in a dungeon, and that is what they're doing, and therefore they are choosing Alliance even here in Siege. And yeah, Ethical is moving on, dealing with the trash back here in front of the obelisk. Complexity Limit now managed. It looks like they managed to do the skip again all the way back to this obelisk, choosing to do the obelisk now instead of dealing with the trash. So just adapting their route because of the wipe that they had.
Yeah, they definitely are having to do that. Of course, once you don't have the Shadow Melt available, the skips there are pretty difficult to pull off. So that's why we're seeing them go for this different route as well. But now back to the first boss room for them. But they've got so much ground to make up. But the thing is, I would say the first half of the dungeon is, more or less the more just kind of kill things half of the dungeon, right? I think what really is going to come down to which team is going to win this map is how well they can do the technical spotter section of the dungeon. We saw a really interesting pull using that Vengeance Demon Hunter where they actually killed just all of the trash in that second half of the dungeon at once from Method NA, which was amazing to watch, and it's so satisfying to see that spotter used to kill, I think it was like 40% of the trash at the same time. I don't think we're going to see like that strategy picked up and used by very many of these teams this week, but that's definitely something I would assume that some teams are going to be like, we need to use that strategy and get used to that strategy in the future, because it seems like that's just the most efficient way to deal with that section of the dungeon.
I still think that the Goosey Bat strategy was really fast too, and that there was not a huge difference in time, just because obviously they did a lot of trash all at once in Method NA, but it did take quite a bit of time to set it up, and therefore it looked like Goosey Bat strategy just going a little bit slower, having more pulls, just ended up being almost the same time. But maybe if you refine the strategy that Method NA did and maybe pull even more on top of it, it definitely can end up being the strat to go for. Maybe even the EU teams are going to pick it up next time around, as they have the third cup next weekend. But Complexity Limit now finally back on the first boss. But yeah, a huge amount of time difference now. Ethical, they're already moving on. They are getting to that next boss. We've seen a really interesting start by Method NA, where they used the obelisk of the Void Weaver to run all the way back to Lockwood, Captain Lockwood, and not actually dealing with the spider, just use the obelisk to do the skip. Something that I like to see from more teams now, but looks like Ethical just chose to kill Void Weaver instead.
Yeah, they've just dealt with it on its own, so they won't have to worry about those extra interrupts on the final boss, which could be a pain with 2 Hunter interrupts. You actually have to properly set up your CC your interrupt rotation every time. It's actually pretty set in stone too, right? It has to be 2 melee, then 1 Hunter, then 2 melee, then the other Hunter. And if anyone's interrupts out of order, then you're just not going to have an interrupt for one of the casts of Void Weaver. So getting that out of the way now, not having to deal with that on that final boss, which we have seen can be a problem for some teams. It's one of the more difficult bosses to deal with Awakened mobs on. It's definitely nice for them to not have to worry about that.
Yeah, 100% sure, especially because on the last boss, in Siege specifically, it's just a hard time dealing with those obelisks, with these Awakened mobs. We've seen how hard it was for some of the teams dealing with the Awakened mobs, specifically the Tank Buster and Samurai, just because the boss itself already requires the healer to use the interrupt on the boss mechanic, because it does so much damage if it's not dispelled. So they have a hard time dispelling the fear as well. And then the tentacles just being immobile and needing to be tanked makes it really hard for all of these area of denials that these Awakened mobs cast. But yeah, looks like Ethical is dealing with this trash back here with the spotter. So definitely going a little bit slower than we've seen other teams do in this area. But at this point, Ethical probably knows what happened to Limit and how much of a time loss it was for them. So Ethical at this point can really just take it slow, because as long as they don't make any huge mistakes, they definitely are going to be ahead.
Yeah, and the question is, how much slower are you comfortable going at this point in the dungeon, right? Because after this, you're using the spotter to deal with most of, if not all of the trash. And because of that raging affix, the spotter is even easier to use if you use it properly, right? It's going to kill things twice as fast for you. So I don't really know what you would slow down on. Maybe you would pull less of Haddle's room at once, right? You could opt to not pull all of it at once, or maybe go a little bit slower in that Buccaneer section of the dungeon. But they definitely do know, like you said, that they have a pretty sizable lead at this point. So I'm interested to see, like you, what that's going to actually mean for them.
Yeah, specifically if they haven't practiced this dungeon too much. Apparently they said they are trying to do Goosey Bat strategy, but they haven't really practiced it that well. So definitely some things that we can adapt and go easier on. But Complexity Limit definitely is a chance to catch up if they're doing any of those bigger pulls. And if Ethical is going too slow from here on out, then definitely a chance for Limit to catch up. So we see Lockwood actually getting another intermission phase, which is unfortunate, jumping away at 10% HP. And these intermission phases take quite a while because you have to kill off the Cannoneer to get the gun to shoot her back. And while Lockwood is away, she can't actually die. Even if she's on 1% HP and there's dots on her, she will just not die. You need to kill off the Cannoneer.
Yeah, so that's just one small thing that, you know, if Complexity Limit is able to deal with Dread Captain Lockwood into one intermission phase instead of the 2 that we're seeing from Ethical, that's probably a solid 40-45 second time save. These are things that you can't really, you know, overlook here. Now, of course, Complexity Limit is going to now deal with that Blood of the Corruptor as well, like we saw from Ethical, and they'll go ahead and, well, actually, no, Ethical dealt with the Void Weaver, didn't they? So yeah, Complexity Limit will be dealing with the second Awakened mob, so they'll probably only have 2 on the final boss, which is actually, you know, they might even, no,
maybe
they're not going to deal. They're not going to. They have Shroud, right? They don't have to deal with that third one if they don't want to.
True.
And I think that they know that they're behind, so they might opt to go for the more risky play in order to come back. So I'd be surprised to see them actually pull more Awakened mobs for the rest of the dungeon here.
it's actually very interesting to see them choose this mob over Zamorak, because this obelisk here, you can't really skip much with it, and I'm not sure how difficult it is to deal with the droplet in the last boss, but it seems easier than Zamorak. To me at least. I'm not really sure, maybe they figured they just can't deal with the fears properly because of the dispel that I mentioned earlier, where you need to dispel the boss's debuff as well on top of the fear. Maybe that's why they, I don't know, figured it's easier to deal with that one. But complexity limit now also on Lockwood as ethical. They dealt with Zamorak now, so they have 2 obelisks left. They very likely are going to deal with those 2 on the last boss, and now we're going to see how they deal with this spotter.
It also just spitballing here, you know, I think another possibility is that in their minds, the only way that you're going to end up winning this matchup is if Ethical makes some massive mistake. So what you should then do, even if it's a little bit slower, is give yourself the best chance of winning by not making any mistakes yourself and going for the safest strategy, which would be, you know, the fewest amount of awakened mobs possible. So that could potentially also be what it is.
Maybe,
but
yeah.
you know, maybe we'll be able to ask the teams afterwards. I'm sure they'll say something about it. You know, maybe on Twitter, or maybe in the MDI Discord, or maybe just in the guild Discord afterwards. It'll be interesting to see what their thoughts are on it. But complexity limit now also on Dread Captain Lockwood. We'll see if they're able to go for that one phase. But with the boss at 85% health, I think it's a pretty far cry to be able to do that much damage in one phase.
Yeah, it looked like they also... Twisted going down, unfortunately, to this artillery here. They have a battle rest available. Needs to be an engineering rest, though. It'll take quite a while to get him back up. Yeah, it looked like they were pulling a bunch of trash on top of Captain Lockwood here with the spotter as well. So this is why they didn't have as much boss damage, probably because they also had to deal with the trash. They also had to deal with the spotter's friendly fire here on top of it. Now, Raging, the efficacy specifically in Siege, is actually in their favor because they can get their spotter to below 30%, get the 100% damage increase, and then the friendly fire will also have the damage increase from that Raging, so it actually helps you in the Siege.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm kind of surprised to see. Okay, they are using the spotter, but they're just going about it in a lot more careful, slow way. Like we're not seeing the massive pull-ins that we saw from Method and A. You know, most teams will actually opt to go for 2 or 3 packs at the same time with the spotter, even when there's a crusher available. So they're also, like you said, I think they're holding back here, being a little bit more methodical with it, making sure that they're not making any mistakes, which is probably the safer play in this situation when you're probably 3 minutes ahead like they are. This is kind of what you want to do.
Yeah, definitely. They have the spotter here in the back. You can see Skylark dropping really low here. Did pop that last stand to stay alive. We also see the turtle coming out of one of the hunters to be able to go into melee range. Those bananas definitely very annoying, specifically if you want to put the spotter's friendly fire into melee range and there's just a bunch of bananas being thrown at you. So definitely nice to have that turtle to be used to make sure that it's placed properly and you get most of the damage onto the mobs. Now they finish it off. They're in 78%, and it looks like they're only going to have to deal with some of the trash bags here in Hadal's room.
And this is going to be the make or break pull for this dungeon. You know, if Ethical isn't able to pull these trash pulls off, they're not even going for the Hadal pull. They're just playing it super safe, doing 1 trash pack at a time. Now, of course, that commander in the middle of the trash pack cannot get hit by the spotter AoE, so they're going to have to actually single target focus that down. But the spotter will take care of everything else for them, so just a little bit of single target damage on the hunters will be nice and easy for them.
Yeah, it looks like Complexity Limit is also dealing with Samurai here, so they'll end up only having 1 Awaken mob on the last boss. They're also out of battle rests on their side, so they gotta be very careful from here on out to not have any more deaths. Looks like Eric is moving forward and maybe pulling the boss, or getting in position to... No, it looks like they're just gonna get out here. Someone is gonna reset the boss. Atrocity is there, pull them out so they can deal with these spotter here. So well done using that skip mechanic to just get out of this realm here without having to use anything else.
Yep, you like to see it. It's just, I mean, they do have good, they have good knowledge of the Awaken Obelisk use, and they probably have seen what people do in this dungeon, but I think it's pretty clear from the way they're playing that they haven't been very well practiced in this dungeon, so it's just kind of difficult. it's difficult to set up these pulls without knowing the proper, way to set everything up perfectly every single time. I think it's pretty apparent here. Now the spotter down below 30% into that raging affix for them. We're probably going to see them move up and pull trash with that spotter and get to 92% of the trash percentage just using that spotter. But here we go. They're going for the full Haddle pull here, and we've seen some trouble on the side of Ethical. Actually, a lot of deaths on the board here. Chompy went down for one of their spotter pulls, and it just kind of has turned into several player deaths for them.
I think this was a huge mistake by Chompy to actually release, because he went down and they could have battle rested him. They have 2 battle rests, so an engineering rest could have been used. But Chompy released, and then we just had more deaths coming up. I mean, he did manage to get back now, but this could have been a disaster if Skylight would have went down here because of the missing healer. So good on them to be able to recover here, but yeah, that release could have cost them. As now we see the the mass rest coming out of Chompy to get shape back up. And Complexity Limit looked like this pull worked well for them so far. And there you go, Chastity going down, unfortunately.
It hasn't been the cleanest from them. They had a tough time grouping everything up, and there were 2 of those snipers in the back of the room just pelting everyone with damage. You can see how much actually extra damage is going on in the group as those go into that raging affix now, and they're having a tough time cleaning up these mobs. You see everyone dropping low. Eric also going down, and Twisted and Fired Up almost going down as well. There's just so much extra damage going out. They didn't really have the proper CC chain set up right ahead, and just the amount of damage their group is taking is not really working out for them. Somehow they're able to stabilize, but you can see there's very little mana left over for Twisted, and I'm not exactly sure. Do they still have the spotter alive, or did it die somewhere? Because I haven't seen any spotter shots in a long time.
I think they might have died, and the snipers just took so long to die, and the snipers just do so much group damage. They randomly target players and shoot them, and then on top of that they also have raging, right? So if you don't have a Sleuth ready for the hunters and you see those raging snipers just cast shoot on random players, this is probably why we saw so many deaths come out for them. But they managed to actually recover, finish off the whole trash pack, and that went better than it looked like in the middle of that pull. They did manage to recover. Now they are going to engage Haddel. They still need quite a lot of trash that they will have to deal with after this boss, and I'm not really sure if they have a spotter left. I'm not sure if they maybe Shadow Meld the aggro from it. I'm not sure. If they killed off the spotter, then it's going to take them quite a while to do all of this trash just missing.
Yep, I completely agree with you as well. Now, it's kind of surprising to see how much they've been able to catch up, but really I think it's more to the point of how Ethical has been pulling the dungeon more slowly and more methodically, just making sure they're not making any mistakes. And then of course they've made, that 3 death mistake on top of that. It's kind of let Limit back into the dungeon a little bit, but because of the massive, the gravity of the mistake they made earlier in the dungeon, they're still just a solid 2.5 minutes behind, and it's going to require some sort of major wipe from Ethical on this final boss to let them even have a chance of coming back in the dungeon.
Yeah, it's definitely all on Ethical now. Keep in mind they have to deal with 2 Awaken mobs, and 2 might not seem like a lot for MDI standards, but this boss in particular is very hard to deal with Awaken mobs just because the Demolisher tentacles need to be tanked and they are stationary, and if no one is in range they will cast AoE in the whole group, which does a huge amount of damage. And both of these Awaken mobs do area of denials that make it harder for Skylight to tank this Demolisher. We see the Blood, who leaves the pool behind, and then we also have the Tank Buster, which does the Dark Fury cast. So keep an eye on Skylark as he needs to deal with both of these Awaken mobs. And there we go, they did finish off the Tentacle, meaning they are probably going to wait before they shoot the boss and just make sure they're dealing with these Awaken mobs before they do the next platform.
Yep, and I can't really tell. If they don't have the spotter, this pull is going to be a lot more difficult. Yeah, I don't know. They don't have the spotter for this pull, so it's just going to be AoE as much as possible and hope you don't go down. But Eric already going down, and this is going to be rough for them at this point. I think they're just going to hope that they can play well enough in the next 2 matches to have a chance of taking the series. But Ethical is already on the final boss of Vikoth. They've dealt with the first platform, and they're now just finishing off these 2 final Awaken mobs. And once that Blood of the Corruptor goes down, or sorry, once the Fear mob goes down, they'll be in safe. But what's actually happened here? Skylark got knocked into the air, which snapped the Blood of the Corruptor on top of this tree. Is it a Vade bug? Tell me it's not a Vade bugging up there.
I think they might be able to kill it.
If they're able to hit it, then it should be fine. But
they're able to hit it.
that is ridiculous.
But it's
What is going on?
to look at the tree, you know, like it's a nice tree. Just wanted to climb up there, see what's going on. There you go. It did die now.
They reset the boss?
Oh,
did they reset the boss? No, they're still in combat. They're still in combat.
Yeah.
Okay, they're good. First cannon shot goes out. Boss. Yeah, okay. What? That was ridiculous. On to the second platform. They're moving on.
For okay, so if you have a mob being elevated like that and being stuck, then sometimes there's a position where the aggro target can walk in to not have it evade. And I think that's exactly what Skylark did. He walked directly underneath the blood to be able to have it not evade, and they managed to finish it off because of that. And because Arrow does have the outlaw range, he also managed to hit it underneath by just jumping up. And we saw the Hunters, of course, doing as much damage as possible, and they did manage to save this. So well done by them, to be honest, to have this very weird interaction with the knock on top of the tree. So now they're moving on to the last platform. They probably are going to just focus the gripping tentacle, or they can also just play it safe. Yeah, it looks like they're playing it safe, finishing off the demolisher first, just so they have more time to dealing with the gripping.
Yeah, once again, making sure you're playing the safe strategy in order to just secure the dungeon win. It's not about how you do it, it's just making sure you get the win. Ethical definitely making the smart play here. You know, you got to play to your opponent, not to the dungeon. They're doing a fantastic job of doing that here. And it's going to net them the 1-0 lead in this series with, you know, like we mentioned earlier, I think we're all of the same opinion that whoever wins this first map has a much better chance of winning the series. And unless there's any major mistakes made from Ethical, which can't happen at this point, and looking forward in the series, their total core time is pretty decently faster than what we saw from Complexity Limit. So even if Limit ends up taking the Freehold, that Toldagor is going to be scary for sure.
Yeah, it will indeed, but that is going to put Ethical up 1-0 against Complexity Limit on that first map. And Tattles, we're kind of, I don't know. Do you think that's kind of how we expected it to go? We had quite a bit of struggle on the side of Limit. Couple of moments here and there that we saw with Ethical. They ended with 3 deaths. Is that sort of how we felt like that was going to go for that round?
You know what? I'm not. That's about what I expected. Yeah, 21-minute Siege of Boralus is not breaking any land records here. Ethical definitely looked like they didn't have a ton of practice, but they were taking it slow enough to where that they didn't make any mistakes. I think Alliance Boralus is wrong if they're going to do it in that order. Mm-hmm. But I mean, they ended up winning the match, or they ended up winning that map anyways.
What was Limit doing differently then? Because if they both didn't have really that much practice on Siege of Boralus, Nagura, why was it that we saw so many more deaths come from the side of Complexity Limit?
I think it was just, the biggest problem was that they just wiped on their first pull. They committed all of their cooldowns, they committed Bloodlust, and because they're running a comp where you don't have any out of combat rests, except on the healer, if your healer goes down, you're in big trouble because you do a skip at the very start of the dungeon with the Shadow Melt, with the Shroud. So if your hero dies and you can't get them back up because you don't have any out of combat rests and no in combat rests, then all of a sudden he needs to release and has no way of coming back unless you wait for your Shadow Melts. And then everything just fell apart from there. And the amount of time it cost them to get back at that point was just a huge time loss. I think sometimes you have a wipe in a certain part of the dungeon and it costs you only 30 seconds. And sometimes you have a wipe in a dungeon and it costs you 3 minutes. And this was just one of those bad wipes that they had.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can really... Go ahead.
The only other type of wipe that could cost 2.5, 3 minutes is going to be committing your Bloodlust to the Awaken pull on the final boss and then somehow wiping after that point. Which is why throughout the dungeon, even though Limit was still 2.5, 3 minutes behind, if somehow Ethical did make that mistake of using their Bloodlust on the Awaken mobs and then wiping, which actually almost happened with the Blood of the Corruptor potentially resetting the boss, that could have let Limit back into the match. But Ethical had the wherewithal and the knowledge of mobs, of what would happen when mobs do evade bug out like that, that if their aggro target knows how to stand next to them and keep it in combat, they could actually kill it and move on with the boss. So yeah, Ethical definitely, saved a potential game-losing mistake there and was able to close out that map.
Yep,
Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to come out of that tree. Please get down here.
Sir, get down from there.
Please come down from there.
An interesting moment for sure, but Ethical is going to walk away with the game 1 win. Tuttles, what did you want to talk about from that game?
So at the very beginning, looked like Complexity Limit and Ethical were playing very similar approach of how they got to the first boss area. And then Complexity Limit came into discovering what the most powerful mobs inside of any dungeon in BFA are: the Black Tar Bomber and the Iron Tide Raider. And once enraged, they were able to immediately kill Max almost 100-0. Those mobs are not something to mess around with, and if you do not have the liberty of playing Alliance-side Siege of Boralus, I'd like to congratulate you, because they are very tough to deal with. Basically, those mobs just do terrible casts, and they kill Max. That full wipe propels Complexity Limit into being 5 minutes behind with the first boss split, or something just ridiculously long. And once that happens, the match is pretty much over. Ethical is not exactly like running through the dungeon with insane speed, but they're utilizing rage spotters. They're doing pretty medium-sized pulls and just raging spottering them down, and we're able to take the first map of the series with that strategy.
And now we're going to move on to Freehold, and something that we've talked about quite a bit today is teams being able to snap back from moments like we just saw from Complexity Limit. And I feel like, Limit, they are a team that has been playing together for a while, maybe not as an MDI team, but obviously I feel like these are very high caliber players, and I think that they could certainly walk away from that game, Nagura, and hopefully play really strongly in this coming game on Freehold.
I think so. I don't think this is gonna bother them too much, because as we know, they didn't practice the siege a lot at all, right? So if you lose a dungeon that you didn't put a lot of practice time into, I think they're not gonna be too unhappy with it, and they're probably gonna be able to forget about it and just move on. And we know that they have a very strong freehold strategy, where they had a 13-minute 16 time with 0 deaths against Ethical, I believe. So yeah, they actually already played against them. Yeah, they played against them earlier where they just won. So I think they can just repeat this performance and even out the series 1-1.
I think it's important, though, to mention this, and this goes for both teams. What you have to think about at this point is the mental situations for both teams. I have confirmed, by the way, that for some reason Complexity Limit thought that Ethical was going to be banning out Motherload and not Siege, because they banned out Siege in a previous match in the tournament, so they were practicing for Motherload.
Oh no!
Hate to see it.
It's a shame.
Maybe Ethical was big brain, like, we're going to ban Siege so that we can then ban Motherload later, which would be big brain from them. But knowing that and knowing how that Siege went, and then also knowing that Ethical has a better Toll Dagor time, this particular map is going to be a big mental test for Limit, because there's got to be some level of tilt thinking that it was going to go a certain way and then having it not go that way, right? On the same note, this is going to be a big mental test for Ethical as well, because based off of the previous matchup, we know that Limit does have a better freehold, and for them to be able to overcome that would be it'd take a large amount of mental fortitude too. So just for both of these teams, I think this particular map is going to show how far these teams have come in terms of where they are, how they play as a team, and how they'll be able to play moving forward.
And the other question becomes, if they are, tilted, like you said, that is something that could be affecting them potentially on this freehold. We saw them try and pull off that kiting strategy earlier with freehold, and the question then becomes, do you think they're going to be able to pull it off for this next one, Tuttle?
Oh, I absolutely believe that they can pull it off. I think the match versus Method NA, it's definitely a higher pressure situation, I feel like, for the Complexity Limit guys. I feel like they'd rather hold themselves to a higher standard because they're playing against 3 of their guildmates as well. I think, and it is Method NA, so they maybe are feeling the nerves a little bit more in that regard. As for this freehold, I still think I have to give the advantage to Complexity Limit just because they've played it so much this weekend. It just allows them to have more live on broadcast strategy, feel a little bit better about their on broadcast performance in freehold. But I still have to give them the edge on it.
Did we get to see them even try it on the last time we saw Limit on freehold?
Yeah, they reset the boss on accident. I don't really know how.
Yeah, but they reset the boss, but then I think Method NA had already won by the time we got to see them pull pull again, right?
They started their pull again, and it was looking okay, but like the match was literally over as soon as the boss got reset.
Yeah, but I mean, that is a good point. This is a map that they've had to play quite a bit, so they may be better practice, but Ethical is also a very strong contender as well, and they're up 1-0. That means they're only one win away from moving on to the grand finals, and this is their last chance. It is 1-0 Ethical versus Complexity Limit.
All right, so we are in Freehold. We see a mirror comp again, exactly same comp for both of the teams. Also, of course, running alliance again, which is not really a question, I guess, which is almost everywhere except Siege sometimes. Now, we see both of them also doing a very similar pull. Only Limit is using their Bloodlust here, while Ethical is still holding it.
Yep, we've seen the strategy now. This is now the third time that we're going to be seeing this from Limit. They like to pull 25% of the dungeon's trash here. Looks like we're seeing a little bit less of the trash pulled for Ethical here once again. Actually, we've seen this exact matchup in this dungeon before, so we know what the teams are planning to do. Down at this point, it's down to execution, and this really is kind of a wheelhouse dungeon for Limit. They showed the kiting strategy. They were the only NA team to pull out the kiting strategy in this dungeon 2 weekends ago. So we know that they're comfortable on it. At this point, it's going to be the mental challenge of knowing you can win, but just having to play better. Whereas Ethical, they as well, they have a good strategy in this dungeon, and we also know they like to go for the kite strategy. So we'll see which team really can pull out that execution, pull out all the stops here in this Freehold.
Yeah, so Ethical now using their Bloodlust on the boss. This is why the boss is going down faster for Ethical, but they are behind in percentage because their first pull was just smaller. So they're 12% behind in trash. I think as far as I remember, they're actually pulling a little bit of trash on top of Sky Captain Crag at the very end of the fight. But we also see the Hunters, the Rogues leave early to be able to start that RP event on the Ring of Booty. So having the trash being pulled on top, a little bit less efficient just because you're two-manning it.
That's got to be on purpose, because this is the second time we've seen this. Arrow likes to leave Sky Captain Crag at like 30% HP. It seems ridiculously early, right? But you can also see that he's not really committing any... Well, not that Rogues have major cooldowns to use anyways, but he's not really doing that much single target damage, so he's just leaving early, and he actually rejoins the group at Council Captain right as they pull it, whereas Atrocity isn't going to leave until Sky Captain Crag's probably below 10% HP, maybe even at 5% HP. So because of that, he actually ends up joining the group probably 5 to 10 seconds after they pull the Council of Captains. So Captain Crag does go down for Complexity Limit first, even though Ethical used their Bloodlust on it. And the only advantage that Ethical's going to gain from that is having their Rogue there for extra, extra CC potential on Council of Captains. I think it's a really weird trade-off. I don't think you want to send your Rogue at 30% HP. Maybe 20% would be fine.
I think the reason why they're doing it is because they are doing this huge trash pull on top of Council of Captain. At least they did it the first time and they wiped. So I think the reason is they want their Rogue back immediately as soon as the group finishes off the first boss and manages to get here, just because of the pull that we're doing. Now look at Ethical now. Look at Skylarks gathering up all of this trash here, using the Light Foot Potion to gather all of this up, and the Harpooner's just gripping him back in. You see how much he's getting gripped back in. This is really difficult to do. And there we go. Now they're engaging the boss as well.
Well, if I remember properly as well, last time they pulled 3 Harpooners, which we found out after the fact on the side of Ethical. They didn't mean to pull that 3rd Harpooner, and actually it was what contributed to them wiping last time around. It looks like they've only pulled the 2 this time. Both teams actually going for the exact same pull size, and you're seeing, once again, how much damage that Unholy DK can pump out here. And actually on the you can see Skylark actually proccing insane right now, doing 400k DPS. The Twilight Devastation absolutely wreaking havoc for him. Tons of damage coming from the Pro Warrior there.
Yeah, and I think the one time where they had a wipe, I think they also pulled a Crusher on accident, so that also caused some issues for them. But this time around, they did pull the trash that they did practice, so it shouldn't be any more problems for them. But yeah, Complexity Limit still ahead in trash because they pulled more on that very first pull at the start of the dungeon, and they also have a lot more boss damage. As you can see, Jolly already down for them, and Droll following very soon after. Of course, this could be also some RNG because of the brews. The more bad brews you get, the better it is for your team, just because Bad Brews do an insane amount of damage to trash plus bosses, and it's way more damage than your team would be doing with a crit or haste buff. I mean.
Yeah, of course, this is the job that the Rogues were doing earlier on. The reason they left the group early was to start the RP for this council event. That's why the pig is already available for them to pick up. And of course, the Rogue will run ahead of the group and pick up that pig, starting the Ludwig RP by themselves as well. So that's kind of one of the main reasons for Rogue in this dungeon. They can deal with this RP, which saves you probably about a minute to a minute and a half of time on their own, while the rest of the team is moving through the dungeon. And instantly already on Ludwig with the Trash's complexity limit, probably a good 15 to 20 seconds ahead of Ethical.
Yeah, definitely. We see Skylark now also gathering up a bunch of trash on top of Ludwig as well. 2 crushers on top of the rest of the trash. So lots of things to deal with for them as Chompy drops really low on their side. They've managed to recover though with Way of the Crane up, huge amounts of burst healing coming out of the healer as he just almost 200k HPS on their side. Complexity limit though already down with most of the trash, and they're now close to 50%.
It looks like Ethical kind of went for that method in a massive trash pull on Ludwig that we saw earlier on, whereas Complexity Limit just went for the more normal pull. This is going to make up that trash difference that we saw at the start of the dungeon, where Complexity Limit pulled 12% more trash. These teams are probably going to be relatively even once these trash packs are already dead, but because they were able to deal with the trash earlier, Limit is going to get Ludwig down earlier, and we saw just the danger of this particular pull. Those crushers pump out a lot of damage if you're getting hit by the smashes. We saw Chompy and Arrow almost both going down to it. Of course, Arrow would have practiced cheat death, but having your healer go down here would mean you have to commit your battle res, and that's something these teams really want to avoid if they can.
Yeah, definitely. You see now the crushers going down, 49% trash, so still a little bit of a difference here. Complexity is still ahead as they're pulling even more trash while they wait for Trothak to spawn. Ethical now down Ludwig as well, and they're probably also going to gather up a trash pool because there's still quite a bit of trash they need to make up on their side. And actually it looks like they're just waiting around. Oh no, there we go. They waited for the Sky Step / Lightfoot Potion on Skylark so he can gather up the rest of the trash.
Yep, and you can see both teams opting to kind of set up this trash pull before Trothak spawns, letting their Unholy DKs set up their damage so that they can start this boss with max stacks of Festermite and get ready to burst those swords on top of him as well. You can see the burst damage on Trothak for Complexity Limit here, already down to 70%, and Ethical is now gearing up to do something similar on their side as well. And so far, this has been a fantastic match between both of these teams. 0 deaths on the board for either of them, and just executing perfectly so far.
Yeah, perfect execution by both of these teams. Very fun to watch. It looks almost simple when those teams do these insane pulls and pull everything on top of a boss, but it's crazy amounts of execution you need to do here, making sure you play perfectly. Can't miss a CC, can't miss an interrupt, can't miss a defensive cooldown to be able to stay alive. You see the hunters kiting the sharks, which is another advantage of having a hunter here. You can have your healer be in melee range and actually deal damage, while the hunter is not losing any sort of damage while kiting, because of course they don't lose any damage while moving. So having the extra damage on the healer really helps. You see Chompy doing 70k DPS here actually on Trothak.
Yeah, I mean the healer actually pumping out crazy damage. Might have also been some AoE. I don't think Mistweavers can actually do 70k single target, but still it's extra damage that cannot be disregarded completely. Now, of course, Complexity Limit is very far ahead on Trothak. 25% of the boss's HP is still a lot even on Fortified, but really what this dungeon is going to come down to, even with this small lead that Complexity Limit has, it's going to come down to the healer kiting. If we know both teams are going to be going for it, it's just going to come down to which healer can pull it off, right? Because even with the lead that Complexity Limit has, if Twisted manages to snap a mob back to the group, trips over a rock, or loses aggro to them somehow, it's going to be a full team wipe for Complexity Limit, and Ethical will be able to capitalize on that based off how far behind they are. So it's really going to come down to which healer pulls it off cleanly. Of course, you know, if both healers pull it off cleanly, Complexity Limit will get the win based off of how far ahead they are right now, but it's not a guaranteed thing at this point.
Yeah, definitely not. But Complexity Limit did finish off that trash pull that Ethical is still working on right now. They are mounting up, gearing to do another trash pull here at the end to get the last bit of percentage. Now, when you do the kiting strut, you need to get 100% trash before you engage the last boss, because of course you're not killing the awakened mobs and therefore you do not get the percentage of it. You see Atrocity here on Complexity Limit side, stealthing past the mobs, using some distracts and saps, and now he's going to use his parry to just engage the trash pack here in the corner, and then the Ravager will kill off some of the trash, giving them extra percentage to the knee. So very neat little trick you can do if you have a rogue here, just getting extra percentage by himself.
Yeah, and looks like Complexity Limit messed up. They could also just shadow mode that off, but it looks like they're going to finish it off. Yeah, like you said, Atrocity has dealt with that trash pack in the back corner, and will now be vanishing the Aggro off. I believe he already has done it, but they need to finish off this Buccaneer. They messed up with these two Ravagers in front and didn't quite split the aggro properly, so they're going to have to deal with that. Now we're seeing Ethical actually go for a completely different pull, opting to not use the Ravager the same way Limit did and just going for a massive pull. They're going to have to AoE this down. This is definitely going to take more time for them. They actually have to fully single target down that officer, whereas Complexity Limit has already gotten the 100% trash and they're gearing up to pull the boss now.
Yeah, this is definitely a huge pull that we see on Ethical side here. Just because they did a huge pull doesn't mean it's more efficient though, because they're not making as much use of the Ravagers as we saw Complexity Limit doing. Now of course they also didn't do it perfectly and had to finish off this one mob, but they're already on Harlan Suite now, and now you keep an eye on Twisted as he is transcending down to the bridge, and now all of the mobs need to follow Twisted. If Twisted makes a mistake here, one of the mobs are gonna snap back, or someone else gets healing aggro, or he dies. This is going to be over for them. So just watch Twisted here as he's kiting those awakened mobs.
Honestly, at this point, the boss HP bars don't even matter. Well, they do a little bit, obviously. Whoever finishes the boss off first is going to win. But with the lead that Complexity Limit has at 25% on the boss, it's just about whether or not Twisted can stay alive. So all eyes are on both of these healers now as they run their racetrack routes around. Of course, they will be able to dispel themselves every single time of that fear debuff. It's just going to be about whether or not they can dodge enough damage and not get meleeed by these mobs. Of course, the most dangerous sections are going to be when they have to turn around, which first one coming up for Twisted right here is going to have to double roll around. And then, of course, once he enters the Council of the Captain room, he will have to do it again and then Transcendence back. Of course, it looks like he's dealt with this turnaround cleanly, just now edging past that breaker of heroes, and he'll have to probably pull it off one more time before his team's able to finish off the boss.
Yeah, this is an incredible POV here, seeing both Mistweavers kiting. You see the percentage of the boss as well, but as Syra mentioned, Complexity Limit just at 8% ahead in boss DPS. So as long as Twisted does not make a mistake, this definitely should go to Complexity Limit, unless one of their damage dealers dies. They do have a battle rest, but the 5 seconds difference will matter. As Ethical is now catching up a little bit on boss DPS, they actually had a little bit more boss damage, but now the boss is below 30%, and he does get the damage increase, so this is going to take no time for Complexity Limit to finish this off, and they did it. They won this game against Ethical, wow. And it's going to be a 1-1 evening out the series.
I mean, you can see how planned it is, right? The Transcendence, the double roll into the Transcendence for that turnaround definitely is the only thing that's kept him alive there. And you got to talk about, like, the presence of mind to play this well. That was a blazing fast run for them too. 12:21 is ridiculous. It's another improvement for them here.
Yeah, really, really well done by them, and Ethical as well. It's definitely cool to see both of those teams sort of pull off that kiting strategy, and no deaths on either side. But Ethical was just a little bit slower, Tettles. They did catch up there. It seemed like they were catching up there at the end for boss damage, but they were just a little bit slower. Where was it that they were falling short in terms of efficiency on that run there?
I mean, they did like one more pull over the side of Complexity Limit. Where they did actually make up a lot of time was at the very end. They pulled that officer with all of the Ravager stuff. That was a way that they absolutely made up a ton of their time. But Complexity Limit started the first pull at like 25% count and just kind of used that to carry them all the way through, where Ethical started the first pull, and whenever they were on Crag, they were at 13%. So it's just like, it was the difference of one pull over the course of the whole entire dungeon, and that's where the very slight advantage of Complexity Limit came through.
Could the 12 seconds of extra time on the board just been the rogue leaving the first boss at 30%?
Maybe.
Well,
I mean, definitely could have been.
They weren't they ahead at that point though?
No.
Arrow.
No.
Okay.
Arrow was there for the very beginning. Oh yeah, Arrow absolutely should be leaving a little bit later, especially with how long it takes Skylark to group up those Harpooner mobs, because it takes him like 30 seconds to get that pull even set up, right?
True, and if he's not there for the pull, it doesn't really matter, right? Because he's just gathering them up.
Because he's just gathering. He takes so long to gather.
And the damage you do there as a rogue doesn't matter too much, because your Unholy DK is going to do it all. Yeah, I guess
He's not getting tricks. Skylark is just like waiting for all three of the harpoons to go off, right?
True. Yeah.
What kind of position does that put you in then? Because you're ethical, you pull off that run fairly cleanly, and it's still, isn't enough, and they end up getting a win over you. Like, what kind of pressure does that put on you, Tyrannic?
I mean, they're still in the driver's seat, are ethical. Mm-hmm. Looking at our time trial times, they still have a pretty decent advantage in this Toll Dagor by about 4 minutes in terms of overall time trial times. Now, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. We know complexity limits theoretical max is higher than that, but still 4 minutes is a lot to make up. Mm-hmm. So you just saw complexity limit pull it off. We knew that this was kind of their home dungeon. We knew that they had a better overall time in this dungeon. But they were able to, hold on home. And now the ball's in Ethical's court. They have to do it now. So, yeah, the pressure's definitely still on. But they should feel comfortable on this map because they have a pretty solid strategy already lined up.
Yep, they do have a pretty solid strategy lined up. As you said, we are going to be moving on to Toll Dagor. But before we get into that, Tuttles, what did you want to talk about from that last game?
Oh, yeah. So basically where we start off is that 25% initial pull that complexity limit does. It's ever so slightly bigger than Ethical's. I believe it involves like maybe 1 or 2 more trash packs. And then, so they bloodlust on that pack, where Ethical ends up bloodlusting on the boss. Yet the boss split was the exact same. It was like a dead heat. While Ethical bloodlusted the boss and was behind trash count. That set them behind really far. Skylark's pull into the second boss with the triple harpooner was magnificent. It just the way that they were able to set up that pull and the patience that they had to be able to do that, spectacular. Beyond that, complexity limit does this enormous pull into Trothak and then somehow even follows it up with an even bigger pull after Trothak. I mean, once that happens, they're 1 full pull ahead of Ethical. Ethical tries to catch back up by doing that officer pull right where near the Ravagers are in Harlan's Sweets room. Almost is able to catch back up with that. But complexity limit, able to kite their obelisk successfully, does take down that match in a 12-21 fashion. Important to note that Ethical actually did finish Freehold in 12-33, so they were just 12 seconds behind. So I don't think either team could be really mad, right?
No, I don't think so either. I think they definitely left sort of everything on the board there. They definitely played their best. It seemed like very clean, like we were saying, from both teams, and they were able to pull off that kiting strategy, which we've seen go very wrongly in some of those Freehold maps. But we are going to move on to Toll Dagor, and we heard Zyro's opinion on this, but Nagura, I want to ask you, we've seen kind of really good management on that Sanguine, which we've talked about a lot today, something that's super important on this map, but these two teams, they're so neck and neck. What is it going to come down to on this next map?
I think this is all going to be about Ethical, to be honest, because Ethical has an incredible fast time that they did pull off earlier when they played against Goosey Bat. They had a 0 death run, 16 minutes, 17 seconds. The only other team who had a faster time than that was Method and A. And we definitely know that complexity limit so far has not had a time anywhere near Ethical's time. So if Ethical plays a clean run as they did before, I definitely think it's going to go to Ethical. But we've also seen them wipe a bunch of times to Jess Hallis, and they lost against scripted content. So many things can go wrong in Toll Dagor, and we've seen so many teams struggle specifically there because of Sanguine. So if Ethical makes a mistake, it can definitely also just go in Limit's favor.
I think that the reason that complexity limit had the advantage in Freehold is the exact same reason that I believe that Ethical has the advantage in Toll Dagor. It's just that they played it significantly more this weekend.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, and
looks like we're in.
We are in the map. It is only one game away. These teams need to move on to the grand finals. Complexity limit versus Ethical.
All right, so we see both of the teams already do a huge pull here to start, where they pull a bunch of these crabs on top of the Sand Queen, also committing their Bloodlust on the Ethical side. Complexity limit holding on to their Bloodlust, interestingly.
That's interesting.
No, popped it anyway.
Okay, there it is. Okay. I was like, yeah, no, that doesn't seem right to not use your Bloodlust here. This is a 2 Bloodlust dungeon, so I don't know where else you would use it for your first Bloodlust. You could maybe use it like 2 minutes later, but with the massive AoE, you want to let your Unholy DK properly pop off. Saving it there would be a little bit weird. So, yep, seeing both teams use the Bloodlust. Now, the thing is, because they used it late, they're going to be sitting unable to hit anything for a solid 10 seconds here. while the Sand Queen is doing its upheaval. But I think you still do that. I think you still get that even if you Bloodlust right away, so it shouldn't be that big of an issue for them.
Yeah, I think so as well. We see the boss HP being a little bit lower for Ethical, so they also pulled the boss earlier though. They pulled the boss on top of the trash immediately, while Limit was waiting a little bit until everything was gathered completely before they pulled the boss on top. So slight advantage here for Ethical. It also really matters if you get an extra upheaval on this boss or not, because if you don't make the damage and you get an extra upheaval, it's an extra time loss, just because while the boss is burrowed, you can't DPS it, and you're just going to lose extra time. So we'll keep an eye on that, as both of them are fighting the Sand Queen.
Yeah, and I think something that's interesting to talk about here is what the actual differences between these top teams are going to generally be. Because usually when you're talking about the top 2, top 3 in teams in each region, the actual differences between them in each dungeon are usually things that you can't really notice too much. They're going to be the small things that happen every single pull. So little inconsistencies, little pull strategies that the tanks do that allow more DPS to be done. Those add up over the entire course of the dungeon. I think the best example that we had was in King's Rest with Complexity Limit versus Method. In that one trash pull that we had right after Minchimba, Method and A just had a much cleaner trash pull, which allowed their DPS to kill it, whereas Complexity Limit had to kite it out just a little bit. Those small things add up to probably over a minute's worth of time over the entire dungeon if it happens every single pull, and a lot of that has to do with whether or not these teams actually have good practice in the dungeons. Now, I don't think that should come into play too much until Dagor, but depending on how much the teams continued to practice it after the time trials, we could see that be taken into account here. And as you see, this first boss is taking Complexity Limit an extra 15 seconds for them to kill. Their damage wasn't really too far behind. I think it was just, like you mentioned, how much more quickly Ethical grouped up all of the trash on top of the boss and how much more early they boss. That's going to add up over the entire course of the dungeon. I think we're going to see it add up if it continues to be a theme moving on.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be those small little things that just add up at the end. Even if it's just a couple of seconds here and there, at the end it will add up and it will make up the difference. But we see Ethical dealing really well with their Sanguine here in this area as they gathered up all the trash mobs into this corner. This is the main reason why we see the Vengeance Demon Hunters in this specific dungeon, because of Sanguine and because of the amount of control that these Vengeance Demon Hunters provide. They have the sigils to gather up the mobs with the small little grip. You also have the fear sigils, and you have the silences coming out of the Demon Hunter. So lots of CC on the Demon Hunter side. Now they're dealing with the blood of the Corruptor, which definitely has to be dealt with, because you can't really fight this mob on the last boss because of the pools being put on Korgus, and you really don't want to see that.
Yep, absolutely. And you can see whenever you're dealing with that Sanguine mechanic, well, you have a nice pool, a line of blood pools fanned out behind you as you kite around, and of course, unfortunately, it's just off stream for Complexity Limit, so we can't see it where that Jade statue is, but good Sanguine management from them. Unfortunately, Twisted jumped over multiple Sanguine pools and went down there, so they're going to have to res him up. Not sure whose job that's going to be. They're just going to have to battle res him because they're still in combat here.
And
a little unfortunate to see.
Out of combat rest either. They don't have a class who can out of combat rest, so they have to battle rest unless he just releases and comes back. But it looks like they did commit that rest. So from here on out, they have to not make any more mistakes for a while. It looks like Twist is not actually taking the rest, interestingly enough.
Okay, he's taking it now.
Okay,
that was
there
weird.
we go. Did take the rest. But yeah, Ethical on the other hand, already in the Jess Howlis area, they're dealing with a lot of trash here. Now, the trash here, how you deal with it is very, very important. Because right after this trash pull, they're engaging Jess Howlis. And you do not want to have any of those Sanguine pools lying in the path of Jess Howlis. Because as soon as he hits 70%, he will go and open the cages, and then if he runs through the Sanguine, he will heal up, and that will be a huge disaster.
What are they getting hit by? They're getting meleeed through the floor.
Yeah, looks like they're are in combat. Do they have Shadow Melt available?
Everyone had to Shadow Melt.
Yeah, they did have Shadow Melt available to de-aggro those mobs. So very unfortunate. There's lots of mobs you can pull through floors, ceilings, and walls in this specific dungeon, just because everything is so close to each other, and things like corruptions like Twilight Devastation can pull something on either side and put all of your whole group into combat. So well done that they did Shadow Melt off the aggro here and get into the obelisk after all. So not as bad as it could have been. So good on them to recover here, as they're now dealing with the blood of the Corruptor as well.
I want to point out something important that was actually pointed out by Tettles here as well. Max was getting meleeed through the floor there, and it actually procced his cheat death on the Demon Hunter. So he doesn't have that available. Of course, the cheat death will proc your metamorphosis for, I believe, 8 seconds, I think, whenever it procs. So not having that available is pretty nasty. And that's something that you really kind of hate to see now. Of course, that's just kind of one of the fun quirks of Dagor that all these teams love. And yeah, I mean, they were able to deal with it with no deaths, but definitely a time loss and having to use your Shadow Mode cooldown is a little unfortunate.
Yeah, keep an eye on Ethical now, though, as they're fighting just Howlis. And as you mentioned before, Ethical already had a full team wipe on this boss earlier today as they were playing against scripted content. So hopefully this time around, this does not happen. Last time they had a fear go through, hit the whole group, and it just caused lots of problems from there on out. But looks like they have the boss positioned properly around the corner, so even if Bobby runs away and casts a fear on the two sides, they can still double line of sight. So double line the fear from Bobby and the flashing daggers from Jess House at the same time. So good positioning from them. Looks like this should be no problem to finish this off from here on out, as Complexity Limit now also engaged Jess Howlis, but they have a lot of Sanguine pools here.
Yeah, the Sanguine management was not the best there, as Jess Howlis did heal to full, and I don't believe the boss phased yet either. They're just gonna have to wait to phase 2, because one of those Sanguine pools is positioned squarely in the point where the boss begins phase 2 and starts channeling that rallying cry. So if I'm not mistaken, maybe by the time they phase her, that Sanguine pool will be gone, but just unfortunate Sanguine placement from them there.
Yeah, see, this is actually why it's so crucial to deal with Sanguine properly, specifically in this just Howlis area, just because he will run away and you can't do anything about it, and if there's Sanguine pools, he will heal. So definitely you want to keep an eye on that. Now we see the transition phase, everyone's stunned, ran through a little bit of the Sanguine pool, but now it disappeared, so they should be okay. Once he's back, there's not going to be any Sanguine healing, so good on them that it disappeared. But Ethical already dealing with Samrak here with the other obelisk that they have to deal with, and moving on to the cannon area.
Yep, and I mean, we've already seen how Ethical deals with this cannon area. They have really good placement here, so it's all going to come down to execution for them once again. But I don't think the cannon's necessarily that difficult to deal with, right? As long as everything's properly grouped up and they have the tools to deal with it in the form of that sigil of chains from the Demon Hunter as well as the Ring of Peace from the Monk, they just have to hit their cannon shots. And I think our players have gotten a lot better at hitting cannon shots nowadays than they used to be about a year ago. So it'd be very surprising to see any missed cannon shots out of either of these teams.
Yeah, so now look at Ethical and how they're dealing with these cannons. You see the Vengeance Demon Hunters gathering up all of the trash here, using his cooldowns. Now we see the sigils coming out, the silence. We probably are going to see the Ring of Peace and the Binding Shot as well. First, the AoE stun by the Mistweaver here. We see the Binding Shot as well. Perfectly gathered. Chompy dropping pretty low here. Looks like by one of the Volcanics. But did manage to recover. Last shot, everything dying at the same time. Perfect execution here by them. Every single mob dying at the same time. Well done.
It's just oddly satisfying to see everything die at the same time, and then all of those tiny little Sanguine pools expand out, showing you what could have been if you didn't kill everything at the same time. Love seeing it. Hopefully we see the same thing from Complexity Limit in about a minute here as well. Would love to see that from them. Ethical now gearing up, pulling that second half of the platform together, using the Sigil of Change to stack everything up as that final Marine comes in. Sigil of Silence coming out afterwards to make sure nothing sits and casts while they all get knocked back. And so far so good from Ethical there. 2 more cannon shots will deal with everything except for the Officer, I believe. Oh, no, they're going to be fine. Yeah, the Officer will need to get moved out. Gets a couple ticks of healing off, but the final cannon shot will deal with them. No issues at all from Ethical with those cannon shots as they move on to Knight Captain Valeri.
Yeah, beautiful execution by them. That was a really fast cannon area. They're up to 87% trash in a matter of a minute or 2. That was incredibly fast by them to be able to deal with this so quickly. Now we see Complexity Limit also gathering up their side of the trash to the cannon area. And now let's keep an eye on Complexity Limit just to see if they can pull it off as perfectly as Ethical just did.
Yep, here we go. Of course, they've already gathered everything up. It's going to be about how well they can stack it here as well. Let's keep an eye on it. Sigil's coming out from Max. It's probably going to use that Silence Sigil first into the chains, and then a Ring of Peace as well for extra measure. Let's see it come out here. There's the Silence into the eventual chains. Of course, he has line of sighting now, so they're going to have to wait a little bit extra time. Ring of Peace to knock everything back as well. Keep everything stacked. and the chains to stack everything up into the cannon shots. Yep, perfect execution from them. Everything will go down nice and easily now. And then they have the binding shot for a little bit of extra. Ooh, Twisted even getting in with the leg sweep as well. And those are going to be out of Sanguine, right? Oh no, that is not what you like to see. The Riot Shield cast actually ruining their day there, unfortunately. Now, the question is, do you just deal with these 3 mobs on their own at this point, or do you try to group them up with the next pull?
I think you almost have to deal with them just because it's going to be super hard to get them to the other side just because these are ranged casters. So you have to line of sight all the way on the other side, but you also have to line of sight the mobs that are there already. So it's going to be too hard to gather them all up, I think. So they'll have to deal with them. And yeah, this is how much of a time loss this is if you don't get all of the cannon shots 100% proper on the mobs. And it was so close too. I thought the cannon shot would hit all of them, the last one. It looked like it, but it was just barely not enough. That last shot was not hitting those 3 mobs in the back. So unfortunate for them. Pretty huge time loss again on their side. Now, Ethical already downed Valeri as they're getting up for their last cannon pull. This pull can also be pretty dangerous just because you have these priests that constantly cast. They need to be interrupted, otherwise they will put a stacking healing effect on everyone, which heals for a lot. It will even out-heal the cannon damage, so definitely don't want to have any of those casts go off.
Yep, absolutely. Keep an eye on it from them, but so far the cannon play from Ethical has been about as good as it can possibly get. Of course, a couple mobs on the second cannon shots had to take one more shot, but in the grand scheme of things, that's a lot nicer than your mobs getting healed. So they're doing a good enough job to deal with that. Of course, now the only thing standing between Ethical and their second ticket to the grand finals now is this final boss, Overseer Korgus, with only 2 awakened mobs, and they have the Bloodlust available and are going to start going to town on these final 2 awakened mobs as they look to take this series.
Yeah, Bloodlust being popped. Let's see how fast they can deal with these awakened mobs. You see the Dark Fury coming out, the huge AoE cast by the Tank Buster, but those teams are just using their defensives to stay in it, because of course on Korgus, the more you move, the faster this bar will fill that you can see underneath the players at the top on the rate frames, and if it fills all the way up, you will get stunned. Looks like Chompy was really close to getting stunned there actually, as he was walking around, getting knocked. And a lot of damage coming in the whole group as you see some of those double bursting shots coming out. Now, the double cast, it's a little bit of an RNG factor on this boss. Sometimes, depending on his usage of abilities, he can have a double explosive burst, which just means that in fast succession there will be 2 explosive bursts. That's a huge amount of damage to your group, and this is why the more you get of those, the harder it's going to be for the healer to keep the group alive.
Yep, 100% agree with you as well. Those doubles have been notorious. Now we are in the Tyrannical setting too, so any mismanagement of that healing could result in a wipe, and we've seen many teams wipe in this situation on this particular boss in this particular corner. And of course they've got a bunch of seagulls spectating them as well, which will probably do nothing if they wipe too, so I don't really know why I mentioned them. I just like the seagulls in this section of the dungeon. But yeah, down to 40% now for Ethical with I don't think there's any chance that they wipe at this point, and you really kind of have to hand it to Ethical. I think the way that they play, while it might not necessarily like blow you away with some of the strategies they pull off, I think they're just so consistent in every single dungeon that they're just a formidable team.
Look at their time. They're gonna do a 15
well, this total
minutes.
Dagor is definitely insane.
That is a pretty insane strategy if I've ever seen one from Ethical here in the Soulcore for sure. I mean, we haven't seen the Method and A strat yet, which seems to be even crazier, but definitely just some really cool strats coming out of Ethical for sure.
Well, when I say doesn't blow you, I mean some of the things that we see from like Method EU or Perplexed when they pull out those insane strategies. Yeah. You know what? I'll take it back completely. They have blown us away with some strats. They did the Freehold kiting strategy. I think Ethical is absolutely a formidable team that any team would be scared to match up against. And moving forward into the third cup as well afterwards, I would love to see them just come out with these insane strategies and show that confidence as well. But Ethical has now taken the series 2-1 against Complexity Limit and will be going into their second grand finals in as many weeks this year. Overall, impressive performance from them. Yeah,
very, very impressive performance with them. And especially considering that they got dropped down to the lower bracket by Complexity Limit. They battled it out in the lower bracket all day.